L'chaim. This is a battle between my head and my stomach. My head says you need a cup of coffee. My stomach says you don't want a cup of coffee. The head's gonna win. Okay, yesterday we asked a basic question. And the basic question was, how could it possibly be? And this is even according to the Chachamim, because according to Rebbe, you don't even have to do Teshuvah in order for Yom Kippur to bring about Kapara. But even according to the Chachamim, the Rebbe teaches that they also hold that the essence of the day brings about Kapara. The language in Chazal is Itzumah Shel Yom Mechaper. The essence of the day is Mechaper. You have to do Teshuvah in order to, so to speak, access that. But obviously the level of cleanliness that we achieve afterwards is much higher than the Teshuvah we do, because if that's not the case, we talked about this at length, yes, if that's not the case, then I don't need Yom Kippur, just do Teshuvah. So the Rebbe's question is, how can it possibly be that Teshuvah brings about this Kapara, that Yom Kippur brings about this Kapara? In the context of the question, the Rebbe said something quite amazing about Teshuvah that we have to review and remember and think about, because it's really very challenging, and it's an amazing idea. What's charata? What's true charata? True charata, remorse, not depression, not remorse. There's another word, but remorse, just in terms of the difference between remorse, there is another word that sometimes people use that is not shame, but regret is closer to remorse. It actually is something. It can be something positive. But there's how can a person can relate to something they did in the past that they clearly relate to now as negative, and imagine if it was something they did to another person. So they could relate to it that they feel badly that they did that to that person, and feel tremendous pain by virtue of the fact that they did that to that person. But the pain is focused on their own state of being, meaning what upsets them is that they were someone who did such a thing. Which is, they should be upset that they did such a thing. But true regret is, yes, of course I'm upset that I did such a thing, but the true regret is that I caused another person pain, and the other person's pain is what I regret, right? As opposed to my action. It happened to be my action that caused the pain, so I'm the one who has to have the regret. But what I regret is the pain that I caused the other person, because the focus is on the other person. If the focus is on myself, so why did I do the Avera in the first place? Because I just think about myself. What's my Teshuvah? Well, I'm just thinking about myself. So that's not Teshuvah, it's exactly the same thing. It's coming from exactly the same place in me. Except now, there's an English word, and I can't remember the English word, it'll come to me at some point. The opposite of, well, it's not the opposite, but a different expression of the notion of regret that's really negative. That I feel ashamed and upset that I did something. So of course I'm supposed to feel upset that I did something that was negative to another person, but the focus should be on the other person, not on me. Right? And if the focus is on the other person, then I'm actually changing my mindset. Whereas if the focus is all on me, well, it's exactly the reason I did the affair in the first place, because I was just thinking about me and not him. So now I'm also just thinking about me and not him. Couldn't care less about him. Right? I care about, how could it be that I did such a thing? So, regret. And what the Rebbe said to us yesterday is to uproot the pleasure that we would get from that Aveira, and then I know that I've done Teshuvah relative to that Aveira. Because as long as I'm still getting pleasure from it, not getting pleasure, reacting to the pleasure that I got in the past, but I can also receive pleasure in the here and now from that event by virtue of talking about it, etc., etc. So then I'm still connected to that thing. Does that mean I'm a terrible, horrible person? No. Yesterday, there was one thing that I should have said yesterday. I mentioned it to some of the guys after Gemara Shiur. One thing that sociological Baal Teshuvah has to remember, the Eibishter put me where the Eibishter put me. And I have to deal with what I have to deal with because the Eibishter put me there. So, if the Eibishter put me in a house that didn't necessarily keep Torah and mitzvahs, okay, so then obviously he understood that that's what I was going to have to deal with in my life. Right? So I can't beat myself up because of the way I might have acted at certain times of my life. I mean, it was a perfectly reasonable way to act within the context of the reality that the Eibishter put me in. Does that mean that I don't have to think about things and extract myself from that place? I have to think about things and extract myself from that place and that's also part of my challenge. That's the challenge the Eibishter gave me in life. Okay, I'm not saying me personally. It also happens to be me personally, but I mean, it's not me personally. It's anybody. Right? So the Eibishter gave us certain challenges in life, so then I have to deal with those challenges in as healthy and as positive a way as possible. And the ikar is ultimately to do it all b'simcha. Right? To be very joyous of the fact that I'm able to bring about change, not only change in the future, but actually change in the past. How can you change the past? Uproot the tainug that you got from that event. So now you've changed the past. The past has now gone from being negative to being positive, which is really quite astounding. Right? I think everybody relates to changing the future. The past is the past. No, not true. It's not true. And it's not. And again, as the Rebbe said very, 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 very clearly, it's not simply a function of not being punished. That's not what Yom Kippur is about. It's about reaching a state of spiritual cleanliness. That means even the fact that I might have sullied myself in the past, that can be cleaned up now. And the Rebbe said how to do that. It's really quite astounding. Right? Eiker hu bekach bezeh a tainug shehayalei be'esa siyas havela. Amazing line. Okay, a biur bezeh. The explanation of how it is that Yom Kippur brings about kapara, and again, according to Rebbe, even without Teshuvah, but according to Chamim, obviously with Teshuvah, but the kapara is greater than the Teshuvah. How does that work? And now the Rebbe says something in a very, very clear way, which we have talked about a number of times. We also talked about it yesterday. We saw it in Anila Doidi V'Doidi Li. But this is going to be the clearest expression of all that. Aleph, Beis, Gimel. The Rebbe talks about these three levels very, very clearly. Every other time we've seen it, it's just been mentioned by the by, so to speak. In our connection, in the connection of the Jewish people with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, there are a number of levels. Again, this is all review, so we can go through this relatively quickly because we saw it outside yesterday. We talked about it at length. The connection that one has with the Kadosh Baruch Hu by virtue of the fact that a person fulfills the mitzvahs of the Creator, and he accepts upon himself the commitment to a relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, Shu Muchan, that he's ready, Lamale es tzivu yabara. He's ready to fulfill the commandments of the Kadosh Baruch Hu. Mitzvahs, first level. Very, very powerful connection. Mitzvahs miloshin savta, joining together, connected. How do you and I down here connect to the Eibishter? Do a mitzvah. What's one of the dynamics of that? We've talked about this before, but it's just it's an amazing idea that's explained in Chassidus, and it's such a simple idea. The dynamic of the event that just happened is that my Ratzon wanted, I, that person called I, whoever that is, had a desire to pick up this cup in order to put it in my mouth so that I could drink some of this coffee, which is going to hurt my stomach, but is definitely going to keep me awake long enough to finish this class. There. Did it. Okay. What's the dynamic? Some superconscious Ratzon comes into my conscious being. That conscious being says, I would like a drink of coffee. Without being told, my hand goes out, grabs the cup, puts it to my lips, and I drink. I don't have to tell my hand, go get the cup. Because my hand is completely bottled to me. Right? I mean, it is me on some level, but it's also bottled to me. It's not exactly me, it's my hand. If you went like that, I'd say, why did you hit me? Would that be a reasonable thing to say? Yes, that's a reasonable thing to say, but I could also say, why did you hit my hand? Because my hand isn't mamish, the deepest, most essential expression of me, to such an extent that a person could do without a particular part of their body and they'd still exist just as much. It'd be a little harder, but there would be no difference in their existence. Okay, because that's not them. What's them is that conscious reality going on inside them, and then even deeper, the superconscious reality of their neshama, etc., etc. Okay, but all of that plays out by virtue of the fact that my hand will go pick up a cup of coffee without being told, because it just is completely bottled to my ratzon, to my will, and expresses my will without any interruption. That's obviously in the case of a nervous system that's working properly. Okay, fine. So this is me and this is my hand. Okay, those are both reasonable statements. What if HaKadosh Baruch Hu told me to pick up the cup of coffee? So now what's my hand? It's him. His hand. Right? Now it's as bottled to him as my hand is bottled to me, which is the beauty of a mitzvah. That's what a mitzvah allows us to do, is to achieve that connection to the Eibishter, so that now we become, so to speak, the limb of the Eibishter, and the limb of someone, and they themselves are really very, very powerfully connected. It's not our etzem, it's not our essence, but it's a very, very, very powerful connection. And that's a mitzvah. That's what a mitzvah allows us to do. A negative commandment, right? That's why it's easy. It's relatively easy to do a positive commandment b'simcha when you think about what the opportunity that a positive commandment affords is. It's a really amazing thing. I get to be connected. I get to be the Eibishter's hands. I can get to be the Eibishter's feet. I get to be the Eibishter's mouth. It's an amazing thing. He wants me to say words of Torah. Okay, he wants words of Torah said. Okay, so your mouth can say them. Your head can think them. A negative commandment might be a little more difficult to relate to in terms of doing simcha. Usually we're not overly overjoyed about not doing something that I might want to do. That doesn't mean I'm going to do it, but it's not, it's an interesting feeling of denying yourself something that you want. It's hard to define the feeling, but it's not a comfortable feeling. Some people can't deal with it at all. They just have to give themselves everything imaginable. Okay, we say that most normal, healthy people are able to control themselves, right? But that doesn't mean they're enjoying not getting that thing that they, on some level, would like to partake in. So how do you do a negative commandment with simcha? So it happened to me, I was just thinking about this one day, and I was talking to our oldest son, who's a very special young man, I must say. He's my son, and he's really an amazing guy. So I was talking to him, and he said, came up in a Farbrengen last night. He was listening. He was sitting in a Farbrengen. Someone else was Farbrengen. He said, in Farbrengen last night, right, the Leifer, famous Mashpi and Svaz, said, we're talking about doing the positive, negative commandments b'simcha. How do you do that? So he brought a beautiful mashal. Might speak to you. The Eibishter's only child, which is how the Baal Shem Tov says we are all to be. How the Eibishter relates to all of us. We're his only child. We're sitting on his lap. He's stroking our cheek, and he says, "Don't go there. That's not for you. Stay here with me." That's a negative commandment. Don't go there. Stay with me. Can you do that b'simcha? Yeah, you can do that b'simcha. When we realize it means I'm getting off the Eibishter's lap and walking to somewhere where he just told me, no, don't go there. It's not for you. Don't go there. Wow. It's very powerful image. That's a love. That's what a negative commandment's about. So that connection is mitzvahs. And it's a very, very powerful connection, but there's deeper than that. He's kashrus apnimis shel bnei Yisrael, the inner connection of Am Yisrael, im HaKadosh Baruch Hu, hanaylis yeser, that's higher, vamuka yeser, and deeper, mis kashrus abab mikim mitzvahs, than the connection that comes as a result of performing mitzvahs, v'kabbalas ol malchus shamayim, and accepting upon ourselves the yoke of heaven. Because the accepting of the yoke of heaven is a decision made relative to behavior, which obviously is necessary. It's incredibly important, but it's still shaykh to our behavior. Hakesher panimia, this inner connection, hu mizbate bekach. This is expressed. Shagam az, that even then, k'sha'avar al tzivuy HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if a person might transgress the command of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore what has he done? Temporarily, Uparek mi'alav erlo Kadosh Baruch. He's thrown from upon himself. Parak. He's thrown off. Mi'alav from upon himself. The yoke of a Kadosh Baruch Hu. Pre-Kisol. Kabbalah soul is accepting the yoke. Pre-Kisol is throwing off the yoke, which is every Aveira. Mekarsem adavar belibai. This Mekarsem is like it bothers him. It rummages around in there. It bothers him in his heart. Chara loy. Chara also means it bothers, it digs at him, it upsets him. Therefore, he does tshuva. He doesn't feel shalom. He doesn't feel whole with this behavior. Where's that coming from? It's coming from a deeper place in him, a place that wasn't powerful enough to cause him not to do the aveira. I mean, I'm just on the level of mitzvahs and aveira, so that level was just broken. But that there's some deeper place in him that bothers him, the Rebbe says. I mean, why is he going to do tshuva? Because he comes to the realization that behavior is improper, whether or not it bothers him emotionally, intellectually, whatever it is. He realizes that was not who he is and what should be done. And therefore he does tshuva. V'chein machmas kach, therefore as a result of this, sha'tshuva ba, the tshuva comes mi'esa kesher, from that connection to a Kadosh Baruch Hu, shehinei, that behold, it is amoik yosef, deeper benefesh in the soul, mi'asheris kashu shal yedei kiyam mitzvahs, than that level of connection that's brought about through the performance of mitzvahs. Tshuva is coming from a deeper place in the soul. The most external expression is mitzvah. A deeper, more panimi expression is tshuva. Lochein, therefore, yesh b'keicha, shel tshuva, therefore tshuva has the power lahasira sepagamim shebenefesh, to remove the blemishes of the soul shenaitzu, that were brought about mi'avedus shichlikshu kesher agalui, that weaken the revealed connection. Tshuva has an ability to fix something that was undone by virtue of some behavior. Tshuva is coming from a deeper place. The mashal we talked about is yesterday, the person who loses a job. We've talked about a number of things. But if your father's the owner of the company, so you can always get your job back, because your connection is deeper than simply that which you do. There's a deeper connection. Valim kol zayis, nevertheless, this kesher is also limited. Right? Gama kesher pnimi hine mugbal. This inner connection is limited. V'nitan liyos nimda, therefore it can be measured b'tenua shel tshuva. Just how successful am I at accessing that place in me that is truly bothered by the aveira? I might not be able to access that more or less, but love dafka completely. Right? Okay. So tshuva is going to be limited to that extent. So my ability to do tshuva is going to be limited. The potential of my ability to do tshuva might be unlimited. Okay, we'll actually see. It is based on the third level. But the actual tshuva will be limited, because it's me doing it, and I'm limited. So the effect of the tshuva will be limited. So to speak, whatever level I happen to reach with that inner work, so then that's the level of godliness that I'll reconnect to. But what about deeper things? Have I gotten down into the recesses of my soul and found those places that require a certain fixing? No, probably not. Right? It's an amazing mimer, the Frierdiker Rebbe, where the Frierdiker Rebbe explains why we say Tachnun after we finish Shemona Esrei every day. It's a funny place to say Tachnun, right? You've just said the most powerful prayer that you say at any time, and immediately afterwards, Hashamnu Bagadnu, like, we blew it. Where's that coming from? Right? That should be at the beginning. Say that and then start davening. Say, I blew it. Okay, now I'm going to daven and I'm going to connect. So the Rebbe says an amazing thing. There's a medrash that connects different weapons of war to different aspects of tefillah. I mean, you know this from Kriya Shema Shalamita, that Kriya Shema is the two-sided sword, and Shemona Esrei is like the bow and arrow. Right? So the Frierdiker Rebbe explains what's that bow and arrow. Where's it? Now, what's the difference between a sword and a bow and arrow? So a bow and arrow can get farther than the sword, right? The guy has to be right here for the sword. So that's Kriyishma. Kriyishma helps you and I deal with certain aspects of distance from the Kadosh Baruch Hu that's very, very present, and we're aware of it, and it's relatively easy, I think. I mean, it's certainly relatively easy relative to Shemona Esrei to concentrate when we say Kriyishma. I don't think people find that people don't start asking questions. How can I have kavanah when I say Kriyishma? Okay, you have to learn what kavanah means, but I think saying those words, especially one paragraph, the first chapter, people find that relatively easy to do with some sense of focus. Shemona Esrei. Right? You want to take a trip around the world, put your feet together and say Baruch Atah, and then who knows where you're going to be by the time you get to God's name. Okay. Right? I mean, this happens to everybody, right? You forget Zachrenu L'chaim. I mean, you just started davening. How can you forget Zachrenu L'chaim? Like, where are you? How did you space out in the first paragraph? But everybody forgets Zachrenu L'chaim at some point. Right? You go, Baruch, you bend down, mugging up. Forgot Zachrenu L'chaim. How did I forget Zachrenu L'chaim? I just started davening. Right? Okay, Melech HaMishpat, I understand. I'm already somewhere in Thailand by the time I get to Melech HaMishpat. But I mean, the first chapter, first paragraph, davening's hard. So the Frierdiker Rebbe says an amazing thing. Why is davening so hard? Because of the power of davening. Davening's the keshet. So what does the keshet do? The keshet gets to places that the sword can't get to. I mean, the keshet gets to hidden places, deep hidden places in your soul that you haven't uncovered yet. And so those places, and also and the corollary in your Nefesh HaBahamis, because it's your Nefesh HaBahamis has to daven, which is why davening is so hard. And also in your Nefesh HaBahamis, those hidden places that you haven't gotten to yet. And those places are revealed when you daven. And that's why davening is so hard. If we had never davened Shemona Esrei, there was no such thing as Shemona Esrei in Judaism, right? I think most of us would probably find ourselves feeling that we're more successful at this thing called Yiddishkeit than we might feel, right? That doesn't mean we wouldn't make mistakes. Of course we make mistakes, but I think the thing that most of us find the hardest to do is to daven. Right? Just to actually get my Nefesh HaBahamis to tell God that all I care about is Him. That's not so easy to get my Nefesh HaBahamis to do that, because my Nefesh HaBahamis doesn't only care about God, it wants breakfast. Okay. So that's a real battle. So where do you become aware of the fact that there's still places in you that aren't connected? The keshet, the bow and arrow, the arrow that's sent to those places every time you daven. So when you finish davening, what's the first reaction? I'm not where I should be. I'm not where I should be. I'm not where I should be. There's places in me that aren't fixed. Why? Because I find davening so hard. I just did, I mean, it's heavy, but this is what people say, and I think most people agree when they hear it, is that probably the thing I am least successful at in all of Yiddishkeit. Putting on tefillin is relatively easy. Having the kavanas that Rav Zusha Anatoli had when he put on his tefillin, so I don't have those kavanas. But am I doing the mitzvah? Yes, I'm doing the mitzvah. I'm wrapping up the tefillin. Every now and then the straps will touch each other and you have to move them apart. Okay, like this is the difficulty in putting on tefillin. Sometimes your shel reish will move over. Someone will come over and straighten out your head. Okay. We all manage that pretty well. Tzitzis, not so hard to wear tzitzis, right? You go to the store, buy a pair of tzitzis, put it on, and so, I mean, what's the big deal? Davening Shemona Esrei? Wow. I don't do that as well as I put on tefillin. Right? Talis takes a couple of weeks after you get married to figure out how to do it without killing yourself. Right? Okay, but you get good at it. You know. Ready to go. Right? So after Shemona Esrei, the Frierdiker Rebbe says we become aware of So where's that means there's deeper levels in our place, and there's deeper aspects of our connection that we have to access. So also when we do tshuva, we realize that we're probably not we're not accessing everything. So there's the third level, and that's what the Rebbe that's what this is all about ultimately. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Hiskashrus ha'atzmi shel etzem and neshama, the essential connection of the essence of the soul im atzmusa yisbarach with the essence of a Kadosh Baruch Hu. We've talked about this. This is the level of the soul that's even beyond Yechida. Yechida, there's 5 names of the soul, Yechida being the highest level. And then there's a level beyond the name. I mean, there's the Neshama itself, right? And what the Neshama itself is one with the essence of a Kadosh Baruch Hu. Impossible to separate the two of them, right? The closest muscle we can get in Gashmias is it's your DNA. It's just the reason everything about you is the way it is because your DNA is what your DNA is. And now I understand that they can start fiddling around and change it. But okay, leave that aside in terms of the muscle. Right? So your DNA is what your DNA is, and you can do everything you want to change that. You can dye your hair blonde for 60 years, but your DNA is black hair, and that's your DNA, and you didn't change your DNA. You changed your revealed reality, but you didn't change your DNA. Okay, so too your essence. A Yid could spend all day doing things that are completely and totally antithetical to his existence as a Jew. All the levels of his soul are affected very powerfully by all of that, except one. The essence of his soul isn't affected. Ki huzeh, he is exactly what he always was. Right? He's a Yid who's essentially connected to the Eibishter. That's not being expressed in any way, shape, or form in anything that he's doing. Yeah, okay, that's going to create a lot of angst in his life, because he's basically a dog who spends all day meowing and drinking milk and licking his paw and cleaning his face, right? So what are you doing? You're not a cat, you're a dog. Okay, he's a dog who hasn't quite figured out what it means to be a dog, so he's a little confused. But that doesn't mean he's not a dog. Still a dog. It's what he is. So a Yid is a Yid. I'm not comparing Jews to dogs. I guess I am, but you know what? This level of connection has no limitation, no measure. And it's beyond being expressed in any movement, any particular activity. Even the movement of Teshuvah. I mean, it's an existential state of being. What's that existential state of being of every single one of us? We are essentially connected to the Eibishter. We are one with the Eibishter, indivisible from the Eibishter. Impossible to disconnect us from the Eibishter. Hiskashu zu eina nifeles al yedei pu'ules. This connection is not brought about by virtue of any action that we do. V'avodas ha'adam, and our avodah. Mitzvahs are an avodah. Teshuvah is also an avodah. The level of teshuvah is expressed by virtue of that behavior, that action, that reality that you and I call teshuvah, whatever it is, right? Charata, Kabbalah, al-Asid, Vidui. Okay, this level just is. It is what it is. You don't have to think black hair to have black hair if your DNA is black hair. It just is what it is. You have to do anything, and if you dye it black, it doesn't change your DNA either. Even if you're doing things that are completely in line with your DNA, so that it doesn't change the DNA. It just is what it is. Ki kol pu'ules adam, all actions of a person, gedelis kechol shetiena, as great as they may be, yesh ben ezeh shimadida. There's a limitation to them because we're limited and we live in a limited world and they're happening in time and space. Whereas the essential connection, hiskashu zu kayemes b'chol adam b'teva, it's in every single one of us naturally, mitzad etzem nishmasa, in terms of the essence of his soul, shehi chelik eluka mimal mamish, which is a piece of God from above mamish. That's the soul. Our soul is a little piece of the Eibishter. That story that many of you have heard, but that's okay, we can say it again. Because as my brother says, even though he has a deeper voice than me, nobody ever remembers anything. Rule number 1 as a teacher: don't worry about repeating yourself. they don't remember it. So say it again. It's okay. Right? Okay. We heard a lot of the same things from the Rebbe over and over and over and over and over. Okay. But the story of the Tzemach Tzedek, right? The philosopher who came to the Tzemach Tzedek. Every time I tell the story, I always feel like I have to say this, just because this is my feeling in the story. But I always had this feeling that they had a relationship. That it wasn't stum that they met on the street. They had some sort of relationship. That this was someone who used to like to talk to the Tzemach Tzedek and shepherd him, right? Because he obviously was someone who didn't necessarily believe as powerful. He certainly didn't believe as powerfully as the Tzemach Tzedek. But that they had conversations now and then. The Maharal of Prague, the fascinating person, wrote some of the most amazing Torah, the volumes and volumes of the Maharal, a whole Sefer on Yetzias Mitzrayim, a whole Sefer on Matan Torah, amazing stuff, all based on Chazal. Everything he says, he quotes a Chazal and then explains it to you. Amazing stuff, the Maharal. So the Maharal lived in Prague and had a very, very close friend who was a non-Jewish mathematician. And they used to take long walks in the gardens of Prague and talk about life together, right? Like the Maharal would explain to him how the Maharal sees things, and he would ask questions and say, well, what if it couldn't be this way? He was a very close friend of the Maharal. This, I assume, brilliant, right? The Maharal, I don't think the Maharal would find the company of someone who wasn't somewhere on his intellectual level as interesting as he obviously found this guy. And they were very, very close. So I always had this feeling that the Tzemach Tzedek knew this person. But he said, it was almost like, he'd come to the Tzemach Tzedek, okay, I've got you this time. And what was his claim? And it's such an amazing claim. It really is. I personally, I wouldn't know how to answer him. There's another famous claim, can God create a rock that he can't pick up, which everybody gets very excited about and thinks it's so deep and so amazing, and it's just basically stupid, right? Because why is it stupid? Not because I don't know, I never met the person who said it, and they even say he's a saint, which I doubt, but whatever. But yes, of course God can create the rock, and of course he can pick it up. Deal with it. God doesn't fit into the little boxes that human intellect makes. So that's not a particularly sophisticated question. But his question was, he said, I can prove to you that God's not all-powerful. Okay. And again, I always have this vision, obviously the Tzemach Tzedek didn't say it this way, but I always have this vision of the Tzemach Tzedek saying, what now? What this time? It might not be true, that's just my vision of this story. Right? Said he can't make another God. Now that's a really interesting question, right? There's something he can't do. By definition, because God is one. Learn the Rambam. Right? Can't be two. Then it's not God. It's not that being it's not that being that has all the characteristics that we apply to a Kadosh Baruch Hu. By definition, it's one. So the Tzemach Tzedek said something quite amazing to him. What did he say? He said he did. It's called the Jew. That was the Tzemach Tzedek's answer. Because what's every Yid? A little piece of the Eibishter, so to speak, walking around in Olam Hazeh in a goof. Chelik Elokam Imal Mamish. Now, are we God? We're not God. But can you cut God into pieces? You and I can't cut the Eibishter up into pieces. The Eibishter can do whatever he wants to himself. All right? So somehow every single one of us has a little, it says chelik, it says a portion, a little piece. And does that mean God's not one? No, it does not mean God's not one. All right? But there is chelik elokam imal mamish, this line, this little piece of godliness that's in every single one of us. So that's the essence of our soul. And that's that aspect of us that is, for all intents and purposes, indistinguishable from the Eibishter himself. The gamata, and even now, b'yesa b'guf, when that part of us is in a body, still So to speak, it's trapped down here. There are levels of the soul that are intricately involved with the body and affected by the body. And then there's the level of the essence of something, of course, is the essence of every level of that, right? Your DNA is the DNA I understand, I think they call it RNA as opposed to DNA, but the DNA of your skin is exactly the same as the DNA in your brain. You shed a layer of skin every day. Okay, it's obviously not so important because you shed a layer every day, evidently. Okay, fine. But that being said, the DNA, you can find the DNA in the skin exactly the same you could find if you could scrape a little gray matter, it'd be the same DNA. The essence of something is the essence of every single level of that. That means the essence of our soul is found here just like it's found up there, so to speak. Because it's the essence of every level of our soul down here. So there's the levels of our soul down here that are actively involved in our reality as physical beings in a physical world and express themselves in our ability to think. That's neshama. Feel. That's ruach. Do. That's nefesh. Those levels of soul that are clothed in the body and the sources of those aspects of reality. But every little the etzem is here just as much as it's anywhere else because the etzem of something is found everywhere. Your DNA is everywhere. Even though the neshama is in a goof, this neshama, is chavuka udevuka bach. It's completely, chibuk is a hug, devuka is clinging, connection, devik is glue, yechida liyachtecha, one to your oneness. That's a neshama. And that's the most powerful aspect of our connection to the Rebbe. There's the level of mitzvahs, there's the level of Teshuvah, and there's the level of etzem. Okay, now, what's that got to do with what we're learning? Let's see. Mikev and Iskashu, since this level of connection, he nailis mikol medidas, shehein, it's beyond any level of measure, or tzir, or any description. Just as it's not brought about as a result of our avodah, it's not that the essence of our soul is somehow strengthened by our avodah, just like your DNA isn't strengthened if you dye your hair black, right? No, black hair DNA is black hair DNA. It doesn't matter what you're doing in revealed reality. Kach, so too, just like it's not empowered by anything we do, also it's not weakened by anything we do. Kach I efshar gam lachlisha. It's also impossible to weaken this connection, or lifgoim ba, or to blemish it, al yedei heder avodah, through a lack of avodah, or al yedei avedas, or by virtue of avedas. That affects every level of the soul except etzem and neshama. Etzem and neshama is not affected by the Avera. The mashal that's brought in Basi Lagani is that the neshama is like a rope, right? And so even the most severe mitzvah, what might it do? It might produce a reality called karis. Karis means to cut, so theoretically you could cut the rope in two, completely disconnect from HaKadosh Baruch Hu in this world. Okay, so I cut this part from this part. It's gone. It's down there on the ground. Okay. So what happened? Did I disconnect myself from HaKadosh Baruch Hu? No, that connection is as strong as ever up here. What did I disconnect? I disconnected myself from myself. Which is why the Vedas are so confounding and confusing, because they just disconnect us from who we really are. They don't disconnect us from the Eibishter. They disconnect an aspect of us from the Eibishter, but they disconnect an aspect of us from a deeper aspect of us that is connected to the Eibishter. That's the mashal of the rope. Most Averas are just little nicks in the rope. The rope has 613 strands, the different ways in which we connect to the Eibishter in Elam Hazeh. So most Averas are just little nicks in the rope. Some Averas are like slashing the rope in two, which are the Averas that most Jews find it harder to do, because it's harder to be insensitive to that level of disconnect. The little nicks, so you have to be pretty sensitive to that. You might not feel it. Whereas, getting into a car on Shabbos, Again, a Jew's never heard of that. Obviously, it's a whole different reality. But a Jew who grew up with Yiddishkeit, he's going to do a lot of aveiros as a teenager before he gets into a car on Shabbos. That's going to be the last thing he does. That's going to be when he says, "Okay, God, I'm out." There's going to be a lot of things happening before that. Right? Why? Because that's a pretty major. Everybody understands that anybody, again, who's within the realm of Yiddishkeit understands that that's a very powerful statement in my disconnect. Whereas a little aveira here, a little aveira there, might not be aware of just how that is disconnecting me. I'm not sensitive enough to that. That's usual. That's by most of us. Etzem, inseparable. B'madrega, page 132. B'madrega siskashu zu. I don't have a little pamphlet. I like your pamphlets. B'madrega siskashu zu, ein habegomim v'achatoyim peigmim. Aveiros don't affect this level of our connection. They don't reach that place. Again, just like things you do in this world don't affect your DNA, right? Dye your hair blonde, right? Say to dye your hair blonde. Men don't usually dye their hair, right? But women, not in our world either. Women don't dye their hair either. But say that they'll wear a blonde sheitel instead of a black sheitel, right? Okay, a woman who dyed her hair. Her husband met her after she already dyed her hair blonde. Her husband doesn't know that she's not naturally blonde. Like, why would he know? Right? By the time he becomes her husband, he'll probably know. Why? Well, because all he has to do is look on the credit card and see that she goes to the salon to have it dyed every now and then, right? Because once the black roots start showing, what do they have to do? You have to touch it up, right? Okay, why? Because the DNA didn't change. It's still pushing out black hair, and it's going to be pushing out black hair for 60 years. This woman's dyeing her hair blonde for who knows how long. Okay. I had a student once who was a fascinating woman. She was, and by the time I met her, she was about 28 years old, and she was from Brazil. And she was married to a fabulously, when you're wealthy in Brazil, you're like wealthy, it's a different level of. So, and she used to come here to son. I used to go to Brazil to teach her, and I knew her for, I don't know, probably 5-10 years. But I met her before she was married, and she was blonde. And then I met her, she blonde sheitel. Then once I went to visit them in Brazil, and she was wearing a dark sheitel. So I said, that's interesting. You always said, why a black sheitel? So she laughed. So why are you laughing? She said, because my hair color is black. She said, I was never blonde. I dyed my hair blonde for 10 years when I was single. Then she started wearing a blonde sheitel because she was just used to herself as being a blonde. But then at one point she said, okay, So it's so funny, which was the real one and which was not the real one. So I know. Okay. But DNA doesn't change. And the DNA of every single one of us is an essential connection to the Eibishter, our spiritual DNA. Therefore, the essence of the day can bring about kapara. Why? The Rebbe says an amazing thing. Here's the answer to the question. The Yom Kippur misgales etzel kol Yehudi haiskashrus ha'atzmis shebe'etzem and neshamim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What's revealed on Yom Kippur? Our essential connection to the Eibishter. And when that's revealed, so then what happens? Mamela, any aveira, any pagam, any blemish in the soul disappears. Why? Because there's a revelation of the level of our connection to the Eibishter where there's no blemish. The blemish doesn't exist. Right? It would be like somehow the doctor was able to deal with the diseased heart by injecting the diseased heart with its own DNA, so it would just revert back to its natural state of being a healthy heart, which is what it was before it got diseased by whatever the person did or whatever happened.
But how does revealing it on one day affect further days?
Now it's in a state of complete and total health. Reverts back to that. It's like that heart, right? So the heart reverts back to a state of complete health. After the doctor did that to me, said I can have another cigarette the next day, right? And start destroying it again. But once he gives me that pink healthy heart, so that's what I've got. That's why I've now been renewed. That's Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is the Eibishter takes us to a place where everything falls. He reveals who we really are. And it's hard to see this in Gashmius, but my vision of it always has been, just to make a Gashmius vision of it, that the inner soul is completely pure, right? But it's covered up with all the schmutzy things that you and I do to it over time. What does the Eibishter do on Yom Kippur? It's like this, the radiance of the soul is so bright, all that stuff just sort of peels off, just falls off. All the scales and the stuff. And now what are you left with? Just the pure soul again. It's there. That's it. Start again. Every Yom Kippur. That's really what Yom Kippur is, which is astounding. That's why it's a day of unbelievable simcha, right? It's a very difficult day, meaning we work hard on Yom Kippur. There's no doubt about it. I mean, you can sit there and just not do it. But if you do it, it's hard work. Davening 5 times, and the davening is long, but the davening is so beautiful. And if you get into it and you realize what's going on and what's being revealed, and you get into the opportunity of it, and that helps you deal with the fact that probably at some point your legs are going to hurt because you've been standing a lot, your back might hurt, your head might hurt because you haven't eaten, you haven't had anything to drink. At 3 p.m, everybody always says, okay, I get it. You don't want us to eat for 25, 26 hours? I get it. No problem. So just one croissant and cup of coffee at 3 p.m, and I'm okay. Just let me get just take a minute out of that Yom Kippur. Let me have a cup of coffee and a croissant, and I'll be good for the rest of the day. Okay, so you might, you're thinking about that. That's there. But you can also focus on the fact that, what's going on today? Today is a day more powerful, even than Rosh Hashanah. Even though Rosh Hashanah is also a revelation of Atzmos, but Yom Kippur is even a more powerful revelation. It's the culmination of the work that starts on Rosh Hashanah, of a connection to the Eibishter that is immutable. And how is that represented in the Aveda of Yom Kippur? The Kohen Gadol goes into Kodesh HaKadoshim. Who's in there? Just the Yid and the Eibishter. That's it. Who's in there? There's no one else there. No Malachim, nothing. That's Ne'ilah. We'll see later in the sicha where the Rebbe explained. That's what Ne'ilah is. Ne'ilah is the gates are closing. So there's 2 images of the gates closing. Literally, Lin'ol, right? To close the gates. Right? There's 2 images of the gates closing. The image that most of the Jewish world relates to is the gates are closing in front of me and I'm throwing in my last prayers. Which is a beautiful image. But there's an even more beautiful image. The gates are closing behind me. What's left in there? Just me and the image. Ne'ilah is the revelation of the 5th level of the soul, the 5th level of davening of the day. We'll see that later in the Maimer. Right? And on that level, what's there? Me and the Eibishter, that's it. There isn't any other. There is no other reality. There's nothing that exists. There's no world. There's nothing. It's just the Jewish soul and the Eibishter. That's Ne'ilah. We're being closed in, not closed out. It's Kodesh HaKadoshim. It's an unbelievably powerful thing. It takes a lot of work and preparation to prepare for to somehow have some inkling of an experience of that. Some inkling, at least an intellectual experience of it. Emotional, might not get it down there, but at least am I aware of that's what's happening on Yom Kippur. Yeah, that's why the Rebbeim teach us these things, so we should know what's happening, because we can go through the whole day and miss the whole point. And relate to it as just, I don't want to be punished. It's a clemency day. So much more than that. V'kasher misgalis madrega zu. And when this level's revealed, neiflim b'meila kol begamim. So then everything else, if you could inject absolutely healthy tissue into the heart that would become the tissue of all the heart, so then b'meila, any diseased reality would just disappear because now it's all healthy tissue. Hamachlekes shel Rebbe Rabbanan he rak. The machlekes of Rebbe and Rabbanan, tshuva yes, tshuva no. Ha'im nidresses tshuva b'gdei shetizgala madregazu. Is tshuva necessary in order for this level to be revealed? So we paskin yes, that we have to do some tshuva in order to reveal this. But what's being revealed is not commensurate to our tshuva. Tshuva is that which helps us, so to speak. We have to open the door. We have to open the door and go in there. Go into Etzim. So how do you go into Etzim? So Rebbe says, you're in Etzim. That's Yom Kippur. You're just there. Chachamim say, you have to do something. You have to open the door, turn the handle, and walk in. And that's called the tshuva that we do. But that's minimal relative to what's happening as a response. I still have to do that. I have to access it. How do I access it? Tshuva. Avalakol meidim. Everybody agrees. Shakapara, the atonement, shel Yom Kippur, shel Yom Kippurim, ain't any fellas al yedei tshuva. It's not brought about by the tshuva. The tshuva is that which triggers it, according to Chachamim. Again, according to Rebbe, you don't even need that. Elo, what? What's the true source of the tshuva? Itzum hashayeh mechaper me'elo. The essence of the day brings about the kapara, and everybody agrees with that. And that's what Chazal say. That's why it's called Yom Kippurim. It's a yom of Kippur, of kapara. The essence of the day brings about the kapara. I have to access that. I access that by doing tshuva. I have to leave where I am to a certain degree to get to that place. But I'm going to a place that's completely beyond anything that I myself could take myself to. The Rebbe is just putting it there for us. Ba'osin adargas, and let's finish this paragraph. Ba'osin adargas shecheti gio pagam, on those levels of the soul that the wrongdoing reaches and blemishes. Ba'osin adargas, on those levels yesh lifol, I have to act. Shetei kapar. That's tshuva. And that's what we do most of the time, any day, every day, hopefully. Vini fellas b'emsaos tshuva, and that's brought about through doing tshuva. Hapayelis etzel adam, that affects a person. V'yedeze gam lamayla, so to above, he's kashrus ma'amika yeseh b'nei levein HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's a deeper connection. Tshuva brings about a deeper connection between this person and Kadosh Baruch Hu. And tshuva, v'sheveres, it breaks, umasira, and removes, as kola shemeneya, iskashusu, it moves it to the side, anything that might prevent this deeper level of connection that tshuva affords. And again, tshuva, just to use, sort of crass, tshuva works where mitzvahs didn't, so to speak, meaning the person, for whatever reason, broke the relationship based on the most external expression, which is Torah and mitzvahs. But there's still a deeper level, and tshuva is that which is deeper and will help reestablish that connection, which is broken. But tshuva is powerful enough to fix it. Ulam, however, the Rebbe says a kapara Yom Kippurim, but Yom Kippur, nifeles mikach, that's brought about not by virtue of what I do, but just by virtue of the fact that there's this day, shemeira darga kazu, that it shines this level, shesham, in that place, milechatchilo, a priori, loikayim bapgam, there's no blemish. The Eibusher reveals that place in our neshama that's not blemished by anything that we do, who we really are. Right? If you just look at the beginning of footnote 12, we won't learn the whole footnote because it's long. There's a famous medrash, amazing medrash. The medrash says, a person who did an aveira, what should he do? So they ask Chochmah, and Chochmah says, should die. Disconnected from life, he should die. Okay. They ask Torah, right? That's what's quoted here, the second level. They're similar to the difference between Ma'aneh HaTorah. What does the Torah say to do to someone who did an Avera? Yavi Oshem, bring a guilt offering, Vizkaperloi, and you'll reach a state of atonement. Do something, and you'll reach a state of atonement. Then what? They asked the Kodesh Baruch Hu. No, what did the Kodesh Baruch Hu say? The Torah said, bring an offering. We do what the Torah says when you use a response to, which is an act of tshuva, right? But the Eibush, now in this context, the Eibush is going to say do tshuva, right? But this tshuva is not the tshuva that we're talking about on the second level. It's talking about revealing the third level. L'man HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what does the Kadosh Baruch Hu say? They ask Kadosh Baruch Hu, Yid that did an Avera, what should he do? Yaseh tshuva. You should do tshuva. Meaning what? Just get in contact with who you really are, and Mamela there's kapara. That's how the Rebbe's understanding that in the context of our sicha Mayanot, right? He's not talking. So that the tshuva aspect is what Torah says. Do an act, which is an act of tshuva called bringing a korban, where you also have to do vidui, right? You have to admit your wrongdoing, etc., etc., and there'll be kapara. Okay, and then there's a level beyond that. Must that connect to who you really are, and then the Mela, everything works out. What does the Eibishter allow every single one of us to do on Yom Kippur? He allows a revelation of who we really are. Who are we really? This godly thing walking around in Elam Hazeh with a body, and that's revealed on Yom Kippur, and so Mamela, everything else just peels off, just peels away. It's quite astounding. Yeah. Now we'll see. We have one more shiur. So I'd like you to see the whole thing. It might be some of it we'll go through outside. Right? Because the Rebbe is now going to show us that Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur have all three aspects. There's the mitzvah of the day, there are days of tshuva, and there's the essence of the day. The mitzvah of the day of Rosh Hashanah, shofar. It's also one of the 10 days of tshuva. And the essence of the day, so the Rebbe already told us yesterday, Tam Lichudni Aleichem, arousing in a Kadosh Baruch Hu the desire to be king, right? Which can only be done by virtue of our essential connection to Him. That's the level of the essence of a Kadosh Baruch Hu that says, Ana Emleich, I will be king. So that's Rosh Hashanah. Yom Kippur, there's the mitzvah Siyim, which is the mitzvah of the day, is fasting and vidui are expressions of tshuva, but there's also the actual mitzvah itself. I mean, a person can fast without doing tshuva, even though fasting is an expression of tshuva, but there's the fasting and the vidui, right? So we're going to say a lot of that. There's the mitzvah of the day, there's the tshuva of the day, it's one of the 10 days of tshuva, and then there's the essence of the day, which brings about kapara. So those are the 2 days of the year where all three levels of our connection to Kadosh Baruch Hu are revealed. Very, very powerful. Mitzvah, tshuva, etzel. Mitzvah, tshuva, etzel.
I want to pay.
No.
Did it record?
Yes, it did. I think so.